We've heard about the great fishing on the Gaspé Peninsula on this podcast and from other guests that we've talked to over the years. The famous waters, active Atlantic salmon to the surface, and an amazing region. But we haven't yet heard about some of the great flats fishing for stripers in this area. And today we're going to cover both of these species and more. And by the end of this episode, you will be ready to plan your next Atlantic salmon and or striper adventure this year. This is the Wet Fly Swing podcast, where I show you the best places to travel to for fly fishing, how to find the best resources and tools to prepare for that big trip, and what you can do to give back to the fish species we all love. Hey, this is Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid, grew up around a little fly shop, and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. Andrew Murphy, longtime guide and new lodge owner, is going to take us into his Gaspé Peninsula world. We talk about the diversity of their program and how you can catch salmon, stripers, sea run, brook trout, all on the same trip. We're going to find out about when to fish the double hook fly pattern, when that works best for salmon, his top 3 favorite patterns and the colors, the only colors you need today, and some common mistakes to avoid that he sees a lot of for Atlantic salmon. Also want to remind you, we are heading to the Missouri River this year. If you're interested in fishing the Great Missouri River, the Big Mo, you can join us right now. Go to wetflyswing.com/Missouri and sign up right now, and we'll follow up with you on availability. And this is going to be an epic trip to one of the big rivers, huge fish per mile numbers, big fish on average. It's going to be an epic trip, so sign in now, find out what we have going. And let's jump into it. Here we go. We're fired up for Atlantic salmon this year. Are you with me? Here we go. Andrew Murphy from GaspéCoastal.com. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing great, Dave. Yourself?
Great. Yeah, I'm excited to talk about the area that you have your lodge. We're going to talk a little about what you have going there. You've got a few, at least a few big species. There's probably more on the list, but Atlantic salmon are a hot topic, for us right now. And I know stripers are always big. You've got a unique fishery there, which includes, I think, some flat style fishing. So we're going to talk that and maybe even a little bit on the backcountry. But before we get into that, maybe just take us to where you're at this time of year. What's your week look like? Are you out there fishing, or are you more tying flies this time of year?
Man, I wish I was doing fishing or fly tying. But we are really hands-on on this lodge operation. So we're kind of doing some final touches. We're doing a lot of paint work and stuff, just making sure we're ready for next season. So it's been a bit of a busier season than normally. This time of year, the Gaspé, certainly backcountry skiing usually, snowmobiling, definitely the fly tying season also. But yeah, this year's just been a little bit different. We've been full throttle, over at the lodge since last summer. So that's kind of been our life right now, is just spending a lot of time over there and getting to put this place together. It's been just amazing.
Yeah, and this is in the Gaspé Peninsula. Maybe describe that a little bit to maybe folks that aren't familiar with that exact area. It's pretty close to the U.S., right?
Correct. So we're close. I mean, the biggest town in the U.S. that would be close to us would be Presque Isle up in Maine. So we're just above the Maine border, and then you go through the entirety of New Brunswick, and then there's a bay to cross, and then that would be the Gaspé Peninsula. So it's like Eastern Canada, and it's this kind of end of the Chic-Choc mountain chain, and it's this really fun peninsula for the fishing. It's just absolutely unbelievable. Pretty short to get around. I mean, it's only about 80 miles across and something like 200 miles long, so you can kind of loop it pretty quickly and move around and just go see what you want to do depending on weather and water conditions.
Right. And what are the main species that you guys are focusing on up there?
So the Gaspé has historically been this hotbed for Atlantic salmon fishing, and we're right in Cascapedia, St. Jules. So it's we're literally on the banks of the Grand Cascapedia, which is probably one of the more famous ones of the area. So Atlantic salmon, huge focus, huge salmon fishing culture out here. It's very traditional. It's been around for forever. But we also focus a lot on the stripers. That's definitely something I do a little bit more of, that I kind of the only one of the few guys that did it, certainly in my beginnings. So that's something we really enjoy. And we've been kind of focusing again more on sea run brook trout, which not everybody does in this area. They require a little bit more digging and, some longer hikes or some bigger canoe floats to get into the areas where they like to hang out. But that's also just been super fun and a little bit more adventurous for us and the guide team.
Gotcha. And are sea run brookies, what is the life history with the brook trout? Because you hear about some of these large brook trout up, say, in Labrador or something like that. Is that a similar life history, or is this unique here with the anadromous form?
Yeah, so it's a little bit different. I'm by no means like a brook trout biologist, but the long and short, from what I gather from over the years, is essentially the brook trouts will leave the salmon rivers because the rivers in the Gaspé tend to be like pretty sterile. They're kind of coming down from granite mountain faces, very clear water, not a like huge amount of bug life, like definitely some. But it seems like that these brook trout have adapted to kind of leave the river systems in the early spring and then go and feed in the salt water where there's a little bit more bait fish and more abundance of nutrients. But they can only tolerate it for so long. I think it's a couple of weeks, like 4 to 6 weeks before their kidneys start having issues processing salt. So then they return to the fresh water and they'll spend basically late summer and the entirety of winter in fresh water.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, so they're kind of they're okay at anatomy, right? It sounds like they can get out there a little bit, but
They can,
yeah,
yeah, yeah, pretty much. They can do a little bit. I know it's a little bit similar with Arctic char, and there's a lot of sea run brook trout up in the Great North, whereas the ones in Labrador are entirely freshwater species.
right. That's right. Okay. And are they, as far as these, how big are these fish getting? The ones that are out there for or is it 6 months or 6 weeks?
It's like about 6 weeks. That's
Yeah,
a
six weeks.
short feeding period for them out in the ocean. I mean, I've heard stories of brookies, like in the 8, 9 pound range. I'm always going to be a little bit skeptical about those super high numbers. I worked when I was younger for several seasons in Labrador, and we weighed like a lot of trout, and it's a 9 pound trout. I mean, it could be, but we get them in like the 3.5, 4 pound range, kind of in that size range that we used to catch in Labrador. There's not as many of them, it's not as prevalent of a fishery. I haven't had the pleasure of fishing New Zealand, but I've heard it a lot, like compared to New Zealand, because it is clear water. It's a little bit more like a stalking game. They'll hold in really, really skinny water, so you're coming down with the boats really slowly, getting out, kind of walking around the next bend, just really trying to spot these fish kind of sitting in these shallow runs. And then we can target them with like dry flies and lightweight streamers. Interestingly enough, like so these fish are like hanging out in the same rivers as Atlantic salmon do. So we have to abide by the salmon fishing rules, which say that you can't use weighted flies. We can't nymph them.
Yeah.
Which makes things like a little bit interesting. And I mean, I'd much rather work them on a dry, honestly, than anything else.
Right. So no nymphing in the area. And then on the Atlantic salmon, what does that look like? It sounds like that it's kind of traditional style. What is that? Are you guys using two-handed rods, single-handed rods? What does that look like there?
So we use a bit of everything. It's going to depend, obviously, on water flows and how hard or how high the river's pushing, and then angler preferences. But normally, yeah, in June we'll start with two-handed rods, and as we get into July, we'll probably go back to either like short. I personally love to fish like a short switch rod, like an 11-foot rod is something I'd like to swing at. But this area is also known for like the clear water and a lot of dry fly fishing in the summer months. So anything in July to August, early September, we'll be throwing a lot of dries, and we'd probably go to like a single hand rod. I like to carry a bit of everything, honestly. I'll usually carry a two-hander and a single hand and just kind of adapt.
Yeah.
It depends on again the runs, the casting distance. I find that sometimes on spey rods, if the water's low because the head is like heavy, it'll slow down your presentation a little bit. So going to like lighter lines can help. So just we're trying to keep an open mind and situational awareness on how the flows are doing, because Atlantic salmon is all about fly speed.
So fly speed is number one, and you want it kind of faster for the most part.
Yeah, compared to a steelhead, where I find the low and slow just doesn't seem to get them as excited. They like to chase targets that are moving pretty quick. I'm definitely in the will strip a fly every now and again, just to give it nothing too crazy, but just to give it like that extra bump in speed. They're very surface oriented. They'll come up like a lot of water, man, to smash something. and they eat really small stuff. So you're always playing with that. You're kind of trying to work your mending and your fly speed to just get it just right, keep it in the zone, but also keep it moving a little bit, ideally faster than current. I find is kind of where I like to fish it. And of course, there's no exact science on this. There's people doing the exact opposite that are, we probably do just as well or out fishing. It depends, but I'm definitely. I went from a steelhead background, so I came in here and I was like, yeah, low and slow, and the mend up and trying to keep the fly in those runs, like moving through, kind of almost dredging. And I started switching it up a couple years after that, spending some time with some legends around here, and yeah, like just something a little bit faster. Let them chase it, let them see it. That seems to wake them up more.
Yeah, that's right. So that's cool. So speed is good, and then what about flies? So do you have a few, or are there a bunch of flies that you guys use? What is that, or could you just come there with one fly and be good with it?
I know some guys that will tie like one fly, like especially in June. They'll just fly, they'll fish one or two pattern, and that's it. Every area's got their own, I guess, fly culture. But out here, the PC stone, the podcaron stonefly, the ghost stonefly, which is just a variant of the PC. Picasso is also like very well known in this area. They've all kind of emanated from this area, from fly tires or guests visiting this area. So there are patterns we fish a lot more, say, compared to the green machine, which is like super popular down in New Brunswick. I don't think I own a green machine.
Oh, you don't?
No, no. It's just different, and then we'll fish more traditional patterns like the black bear, green butt, and stuff like that, in smaller sizes. There's just a bunch of patterns that are fun, and maybe again a little bit more unique to this area. One of the guides that works with us, Alex, he's this incredible fly tyer, and he comes up with a bunch of patterns. Like, he's someone that really has that drive to sit at the vise, and it's kind of like his creative space. So I guess I've got like a bunch of stuff in my boxes that are just unnamed creations or yet to be named creations from what he's tying, and that works well. Um, I'm not the guy that's going to change the most flies. I'm definitely also in that school of thought of maybe I'd rather cover a lot of different spots, like cover a lot of water in a day, than focus on one pool where there's many fish. So I don't change it necessarily, and I'm just kind of looking for that right fish, which is usually a pretty decent strategy, especially in early season. As they get more finicky, or if they've been in the river system a little bit longer, their kind of drive goes down a little bit, and then maybe we'll spend longer time on one area and just kind of trying different patterns, different styles. Fly profile obviously is gonna affect presentation, fly speed, and then size.
What does that profile typically look like? Because are these really small, little, thin flies, or they have a little bit of bulk?
They can be kind of bulky. We don't have anything that really resembles like say an intruder, where you're really trying to displace large amounts of water. But some flies, like the PC stone, what's interesting about it is it is tied with a parachute, and it is fished as like a wet fly. So there's got to be something in that kind of conic structure on the head that's just like displacing a little bit more water that gets their attention. Traditional salmon fly, like the red Francis, is basically like a carrot, like it's an orange cone.
Yeah.
With very stiff or whiskers in the back, and that's also got to be like just doing some water displacement. But they're not these big, bulky, like bigger profile flies that you'd see typically on the West Coast.
Yeah. They're smaller flies, more traditional. I'm almost more like a traditional wet fly, right? Like something you'd use that's. It seems like the smaller the better when you look at some of the flies, and and then I go to the Atlantic salmon, the traditional stuff. Some of the the highly dressed. I'm not sure where those would be used. Have you ever tried any of that stuff?
No, not the classic stuff. We have like a couple that were like given to us by friends that are just again into like the fly tying world, and they're kind of a point of pride. I don't know. I would guess it might have been, was it maybe just like showing off back in the day?
Right, maybe that's what it was. Yeah.
I think so. To a certain extent, maybe like, if you go back 100 years, it was just kind of a point of like, ooh, like look at how cool these flies are with imported material and like very elaborate fly design. I don't know like if there's anything comparable to this day. Maybe like I've got a buddy who's like really into smallmouth bass fishing, and he gets these like hard plugs and jerk baits from Japan, and they cost like an arm and a leg, and they're hard to find, and maybe that's a little bit the essence that the guys were doing 100 years ago.
Yeah, that's right. They're more fly tires than fishermen, maybe. And it looks like some of the flies, like the ghost stonefly, is. I mean, is it green? Is typically is it looks like that bright green, almost chartreuse. Is that a pretty common? If you had to pick one color,
It's a common color out here.
yeah, green. So green and reds are those the two? What's the two most common color for like the body?
Bonnie, yeah, definitely some green colors, some blues would work really well. Yellows, oranges.
Like a blue charm, right, or something like that.
Yeah, like blue charm could work super well. And if you get into the Picasso, the people will just change the colors up on them, like the underwing. So the fly is predominantly gray.
Oh, this is the PCAS.
Picasso, yep.
How do you? Oh, PCAS fly. Yeah,
Yeah,
Picasse.
yeah, exactly. And these are kind of cool, and people will tie them with like hair and feathers, and they can get like a little bit
Oh yeah,
bulkier.
yeah. See, those look a little. Yeah, I'm looking at them now. Now that looks a little more. At least these are tied more on traditional, up eye hooks. But yeah, I see it. So it's a kind of a dark fly. It's got a green, maybe a green hair wing or something like that.
Yeah, and people will play with the hair wing color.
Yeah, I see. So there you go. But yeah, very streamlined. So that's what we're looking at. So you could probably take any flies you were maybe using, with summer steelhead. I always make that analogy. The summer steelhead is probably the best analogy, but I don't think there's many summer steelhead on the East Coast. Or is there? Have you fished for summer, or is it mostly winter steelhead that you've done?
So I've done mostly winter steelhead.
Yeah.
So, when I was younger, basically we'd get through the guide season and then fly out to BC. Did 3 trips out there, so that was fun. 2 of them in the fall, leaning into early winter. And then a couple years ago, we went to see a super good friend of ours on the Lower Skeena, and we fished in April, which was super fun.
Fish the Fly Guide Service is dedicated to sharing the incredible fly fishing opportunities around Jackson Hole. Whether floating the scenic Snake River in search of native cutthroat trout or hiking into the mountains to explore pristine tributaries, every day on the water is an adventure. You can join them for an unforgettable fly fishing experience in the heart of the Tetons at fishthefly.com. FishHound Expeditions offers world-class fly fishing right off Alaska's incredible road system. From monster rainbow trout to feisty Arctic grayling, you'll chase big species in the stunning landscape. Whether you're a seasoned angler or just starting out, their expert guides ensure an unforgettable adventure. Book your trip today before spots fill up and experience Alaska's diversity like never before. Check them out right now. That's fishhoundexpeditions.com. And that's what I think is what's great about, this trip, the Atlantic salmon, is that it's more, the fish are more active, like you're saying, that they're moving more. And it sounds like you guys get some action there. So maybe talk about the lodge that you have going. This is something new that is it opening just this year for the first time, or talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so it's going to open this year, being like our own place. Essentially, it's myself and my partner, Sarah. And we have another guy, Kyle Schaefer, out from the US that's giving us a hand and partner in the business. But Sarah, Kyle, and I have been working together, getting to know one another a lot in the last 4 years now, I guess. And so we put together essentially some pop-up lodges. We rented out a camp that wasn't operating in the later summer months, and we had some friends of Kyle and some of our friends come up and kind of check out the fishery and run it a little bit more as a 5-day program. So we kind of took baby steps that way, and we wanted to find a property here in Cascapedia, St. Jules. We really wanted to be in this town because this is where Sarah grew up. This is where we live. And we know the community super well. So it took us a while to find the right property, but we eventually did. It took us even longer to actually purchase it. And we got our hands on it last spring. So then we hopped in and started building it back up and getting ready for the camp for this season coming.
Wow. Yeah. So this is it. So this is the season. So you're going to be out there fishing out of the lodge this year.
Yeah, correct.
Oh,
Yeah,
nice.
we're super excited. It's going to feel nice to be in our own spot, and
Yep.
this being like a new property, like a new project, we were able to really tailor it to our needs and kind of what we learned from previous work experiences and just little stuff like how we set up the kitchen, just so we know that it's easier for a chef to work in, how we're storing our boats, how we're storing our gear. We made sure we had like room to put stuff away. We took the time to build a like a little waiter room. So when the guys come back from fishing, we've got this little room where you can kind of get rid of your fishing tackle, get out of your wet waders for the day, and there's a fireplace in there. We can dry the stuff out, and you don't have to like live with it in your room.
Right.
Just little touches that we were like thinking about, and stuff we saw at other lodges while we were traveling that we wanted to integrate. So that's been fun, is to really like kind of customize it to what we think is the best version we could do.
Gotcha. Is there a mix of people driving out there or most people flying out coming into that area?
Yeah, it really depends. So the Gaspé is not necessarily like the easiest destination to get to,
Yeah.
just because it's far and it's a low population density. So most of the East Coast guys will drive up because we're essentially like 8 hours away from Boston.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, if I'm catching an international flight to go somewhere, I'll drive to Boston Airport or Portland and fly out of there. So the East Coast crew, they tend to drive up. And if anybody's like flying in from the West Coast or a little bit further, they usually end up landing in Bathurst, which is about an hour and a half away, and we go pick them up at the lodge and bring them back. It's like a really nice scenic coastal drive, and it's pretty well connected. It's an Air Canada flight, so you hop into Toronto or Montreal, and then you get the it's like an hour and a half, 2 hour flight to get to Bathurst. So it's all pretty well connected. It's a bit of a mix. It is nice to drive up like with your own vehicle if you're a little bit adventurous, because once you're done with the lodge, maybe I still think it's one of the coolest road trip destinations to do the entire loop of the Gaspé.
Oh, yeah, that would be cool.
And you can just go out and fish like all these rivers along the way, or hit some salt spots for stripers. It's a cool, like, it's always been known as a road trip destination. So I do recommend sometimes people like take your car up and drive it. But yeah, we've got that connection. There's this private airport nearby, so we'll have some guests that will charter out of Montreal and come into that if the flights don't quite line up for their needs. And you can take the night train, which is really cool. Definitely not the most efficient way of doing it.
Yeah, but if you have time.
Yeah, if you got time, it's fun. It's got the food cart and the bar cart, and play some cards all night, and kind of, you wake up and you arrive in the Matapedia Valley, and it's like this beautiful train ride to come into it.
Oh, that sounds pretty awesome. Yeah, that sounds great. And so the timing, it's pretty short season for the Atlantic salmon. Is this kind of a June, July? What does that look like?
We run from June to September.
Yeah, June to September. So
Yeah.
so June. So when would be your last trips out there?
So September 30th is really kind of our close dates.
Okay, so yeah, so you cover. So there is a good. And then when do you start? When would you be starting there?
June 1st, man.
Yeah, so right on it. So you have 4 good months there. Is it kind of, there's a little bit of a shoulder season on the, June and September, or do you guys get fish? Is it pretty solid throughout those 4 months?
It is pretty solid, because I must say we're lucky in Quebec, and we're lucky in this particular area where we have access to essentially like 4 salmon rivers within a 45-minute drive. So we can fish the rivers. We have like good access to public water. So we have these longer stretches of river. So we can, depending on how the migration is going, where the fish are heading up, we can find some spots where the fish tend to be happier. We have some rivers that run colder than others. The Grand is a little bit tinted, so it'll heat up a little bit more in the summer. Whereas, say, the Petite Cascapedia will remain really cold throughout. So we look at water temps. We play around that. Obviously, sometimes it can be shoulder seasons. August, can be a little bit slower. It's a time of month I do enjoy fishing personally, because there's barely anybody on the water. We keep an eye out on water temps. We don't want to mess around with the salmon fishing if the water is getting too hot. Like, that's really something that concerns us a lot. So we kind of have a policy in August to usually fish like really early in the mornings if there's no flow. But the cool thing about August is when you get a dump of water, because you'll get a storm that will come through, like a little rogue, thunder shower or something, or you'll get maybe a day of rain. And if these waters like bump up, it's chaos.
It's on.
It's on, man. It just goes crazy. And 2 years ago, We had a couple of groups back to back coming up, especially for the striper fishery, because August is nice and warm and, like staple weather and stuff. And we got dumped on like crazy. Like
Yeah.
we had the rivers were flowing higher than they do in the runoff, essentially. Like we had such a high amount of water, which kind of hindered our flats fishery quite a bit. But the salmon fishing ended up being great. And we're talking to the other guides in our area, and everybody's like, yeah, this year, like August was the month to fish. It's water dependent, right? Like any migratory fish, any sea running fish like that, I find like water flows are super important. They don't like it when it's low and slow. So we work around that, and that's why we have a pretty robust, brook trout fishing program, and that's why we like to focus on the stripers and kind of mingle everything together. So depending on what the guests want to do, what people want to come up and do an experience, we're kind of ready to offer it. And then we'll make some recommendations based on what we think will give the best fishing, depending on what people, again, want to experience.
Gotcha. So if somebody was coming up for a week up there, you could, let's just say, what would be the time where you could have a chance at those 3 species? Is there a good time there?
Oh, year round.
Yeah, it's year round. So all those brookie.
The only ones, the brookies could be a little bit harder in June, essentially. We like to focus on the brookies kind of starting, if we're a third of the way through July, we'll start going a little bit more on brookie trips. There's some smaller streams that get resident fish that we can focus on earlier than that. But the salmon and the stripers kind of line up pretty well at the start of the season. And then we go through June, July. It's just everything is bumping. August, again, super good to play around with the brook trout a little bit. If we get a bump of water, that's great. The salmon fishing, it's my time to fish, because it's usually like our less busy time in guiding. Like if I'm going to have a couple of days off in a row, it's been August in the last few years. So we'll make the time to go salmon fishing, and we figure it out, but we might be throwing size 12, size 16, like really small tube flies kind of hitched, on the surface or stuff like that. Just like trying different stuff and get up in the morning and go for it. But we've had good success. And then September, everything kind of picks back up, I guess. The brook trout fishing closes early September. And then we usually get the first couple of storms or the hurricane tailouts that kind of hit us. So we tend to get higher flows. So the salmon fishing gets good again or like gets really hot on the two-handers. The males get like a little bit more brutish, kind of starting to get into spawns.
When are they going to be spawning out there?
It happens like a couple weeks after our close. So it's like late into October, essentially. We'll see a little bit of pre-red activity in late September, but it's not as noticeable.
It's not. So at the start in June, you're seeing fish that are chrome bright, and then by September, before it closes, are you seeing fish with are they getting some coloration on them?
Oh, they're pretty colored up usually.
And they're just colored up with just the typical what is the Atlantic salmon? What do they look like when they're really colored up before spawning?
They look, I guess they look like a brown trout, essentially.
Yeah, right. That's what they do. Yeah, they become more. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. You can see they're kind of cousins. They're related, the brown trout and Atlantic salmon, and you can really see it when they're colored up, or they'll look like obviously it's kind of the same fish, but like anybody that's caught a landlock in the Northeast in October.
Yeah, landlock.
Like they kind of have those colors, but they'll start dying bright. And then they go through a variation of color, and you'll see the odd fresh fish in September and October, because there's still some fish running through the season, but the bulk usually come in at late June. Is kind of mid-June, late June is when we get the big push of fish usually.
Okay, and so and you're fishing a little. What are the lines you're Is this pretty much all dry dry lines? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's dry lines, grease lines. Kind of long leaders, Scandi style. Really rare that we'll bring out anything that's like heavy. I'll fish maybe a light sink tip, nothing too heavy, but just to make sure my fly is kind of tracking in the water.
Yeah, like an intermediate sink tip or something like that.
Yeah, or like slow sink, something that gives like 1.5 inches, a second or something. Nothing crazy.
Yep, just to get under the surface.
Yeah, just to get out. And the only time I'll fish low and slow is like the last 10 days of September. If we've got, a good fall where it's getting cold, because we'll get frost in the mountains by late August, on a year where the winters are kind of lining up. So the temperatures cool out, the water gets like super high, and then I find the salmon will behave a little bit more like a steelhead. They'll like those like slower presentations. I'll fish like a 2 inch, 2.5 inch hobo spay.
This is in the fall.
Yeah, in the fall. Yeah, at the tail end of the season. It's a way I enjoy fishing because it's I was steelhead fishing the Great Lakes or whatever, Lake Run, Rainbow, whatever you want to call them. But I was doing more steelhead fishing when I was younger than I was Atlantic salmon fishing. Just I was a little bit closer to those river systems. It was cheap for me to go with some buddies over the weekend. So I've got still like that itch inside of me of like, let me throw an intruder on a sink line and see like how they behave to it.
Yeah, that's cool. So you do get a little bit of that later. And then the dry flies too, right? Are you getting pretty good action? Like what would be a fly on the surface? Are you using that quite a bit, or did we already talk about some of those flies?
No, we fish. I mean, the bomber is just
Yeah, the bomber.
the
That's
bomber.
the one.
That's the one.
That's all you need. So you just need a bomber is pretty much all you need.
Yeah, and it's funny because you're talking about like fly color. The one fly I'll get like I'll go through a couple colors and like work a fish for longer as a bomber. Because you'll see it, you'll get to a pool again, the water's like crystal clear, so you can see the fish are laid up. And if you throw a bomber and on the first like 2 or 3 hits, you can kind of see that it's bugging him, or salmon kind of maybe came up a little bit and then gave up on it. That's definitely somewhere where I'll stick on that fish a little bit longer. I'll rest it, kind of sit on the bank, shoot the shit for 10, 15 minutes, try a different color, do 2, 3 passes at him, see if he comes back to it, if he gets excited, play with the size a little bit. So, but it's always the same fly. It's always a bomber or a bug, whatever. It's just like minor differences, but essentially a floating cork there.
Right. And that's typically in that June, July, August. Is that usually the best time?
Yeah, it's good pretty much year round. It's just the fish need to be in water that's a little bit warmer. I like to start doing some dry fly fishing like that if it's above 58. Just because you need that little spurt of activity and get them kind of a little bit more aggressive, I guess, when the water heats up a little bit. If not, they're a little bit more sluggish in the cold water. But it will start like second week of June, maybe. It depends on the years. Last year we had a really early and really warm spring, and we had some fish come up, and we heard of fish being caught on bombers like in the first week of June, which is not common. And other years, big snowpack, a lot of runoff. You can get some mucky maize, and you might have to wait till July to really start dry fly fishing.
Okay. And so let's just say we were going to be there in July, say early, mid-July. And so then you could use a two-hand rod or a single hand. Would either work then?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're bringing a two-handed rod, you could bring like you said, a little bit shorter, so maybe something more like a 12-foot range as opposed to a 13, or even, like you said, 11 is better than the longer stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because just last weekend we were having a supper with some guy buddies, and we got into this long-winded argument about like the rod sizes. I'm a like 12 and a half, 7 weight. That's the stick I like to throw. It feels good in my hand. It's got like the stopping power that I need. I don't fish like clicker reels. I fish dragged reels. It just feels comfortable for me for my personal casting style. But then my buddy Jack was, he's a 8'9", 13'6", like a big stick.
Yeah.
Again, it's just going to depend on personal preferences. I think a 12 and a half, 7 weight is going to cover most of these rivers, unless you're fishing the Rusty Goose or you're fishing like Matapedia, which tend to be really big, or like the main stem of the Grand. There's some bigger pools, but the rest of the rivers, something a little bit shorter works well. And then as soon as the flows keep going down, I'll go to a switch rod. Kind of the same, like an 11-foot, 7 weight dragged reel again, just because I don't need that length. You fished it enough that sometimes you get into the groove when you're spay casting, which is like super enjoyable. But at some point, if you stop thinking about it and you're just like kind of throwing these long lines out, you might be fishing just too long for no valid reasons.
Yeah. So you don't have to. There's just lots of areas where they're in close.
Oh yeah, they can be really, really close, and especially the fish that are kind of taking, they're going to be in these like faster, skinnier runs.
Yeah, skinny runs. Okay.
Yeah, so not necessarily need to bomb it all the way across and kind of. You don't want to catch the eddy on the other side and then start with a slow presentation and just kind of whip it through the run.
All right. What is the typical water? And what would be, let's just say we were coming up there in, kind of like you said, early July, mid-July. What would be one of the rivers we'd likely be fishing?
I mean, ideally in a week, like all of them. I think that's what's interesting about what we're trying to do and kind of our philosophy is to be like as flexible as possible. And we have a guide team that's excited about that, that fishes all the rivers around here. So man, if you're coming up and you've read about the Bonaventure all your life and you want to spend like 4 days on the Bonaventure, we'll do it,
Okay. And is that the most famous? Because there's a number of well-known rivers. What do you think are what's the most famous, or the list of the top that you have there?
The most famous and the most written about would definitely be like the Grand Cascapedia.
Yeah.
It's just this really iconic river. The issue with the Grand is it's one of the last strongholds of private fishing clubs in Quebec.
Oh, gotcha.
So the main stem is split amongst about half a dozen private camps that have, kind of exclusive beats to it. And then the other way you can fish it is through the Cascapedia Society, which does give like some public access, but it's quite expensive. We're talking anywhere from $1,200 to almost $2,000 for a day of fishing on the main stem. So very, very pricey.
Yep.
It's fun. It's iconic. You get to fish these like legendary pools. But yeah, the Grand is just like a little oddball.
Yeah, the Grand. Okay.
The main stem. But what we do try to fish more is what we call the branches. So the river splits into two smaller branch upriver. And that would be kind of more the public water, we could say, where we have access as independent guides a little bit more to the water and guiding, but it's all draw. So the Grand is just like the most famous and the most finicky to get access on. Whereas the Bonaventure is one of the rivers in Quebec where you have like the most public water, and also like the way they split it up, there's just like a ton of access and really good pools in the unlimited public access rivers. Kind of the same thing for the Petite. And then we always take care of like having all of our guests enter the draw. So there's a continuous lottery where you can access some beats with a lower amount of rods. The the salmon access in Quebec, every time I go through it, it's just like
it's a lot to it.
It's a lot to it. It's really a lot to it. Once you get it, you'll get the hang of things.
Well, what's it called there? The system? Is there a name of that system?
Yeah, so the managing arms are called ZEX.
Yeah, that's right. So we've heard on our In the Bucket series, Brian has talked a little about with some guests that I think one of them, I can't remember the name who had on, but he mentioned how much they love that system.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why is this? Because the other thing, you could look at other areas where it's either all private or it's a different type of system. Why is the ZEX system so, is good? Why is it good?
Well, what's great about the ZEC is it puts a lot of power into the angler's hands, right? So they're run by nonprofit boards. I got to sit on one of those boards for a couple of years on the Petite. And so you can have people that really have to heart these rivers kind of drive how the ZEC is managed. And they'll provide private warden services. There's employees that are just going to be like wardens for the entire season, so we can cut down on poaching and make sure everybody's kind of playing by the rules. But ZEX will also be involved in various conservation projects. On the Grand, they have a biologist that's, almost full time. So we'll get yearly fish counts. We'll do some good tracking. In the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about identifying cold water shelters and maybe putting those off limits to angling in the summertime. So those fish can get a break in, those freshwater, cold water sources coming out in the river. So it's just interesting to have these people, because they have managers that work full-time jobs just looking after these rivers, and so they'll look after them, and on the flip side they'll also provide access. So this is a very it's a very comfortable sport where you're out in the wilderness, on these wild rivers, but the Zecs will manage dry toilets. They'll manage picnic areas, warming and stuff like that, road access. You go to the Zec and they'll give you a map of all the named pools. And then when you're driving on the logging roads, like you have signs are custom printed and made out, nice access. They'll build staircases down, spaces. So it's not, this isn't the wilds of the Northwest, where you're scrambling up and down hills and trying to get backcountry. There's a properness to it.
Step into the world where the river whispers and the fishing is nothing short of legendary. This year, I ventured into the heart of eastern Idaho's Yellowstone Teton territory where the fish were larger than life and the waters held the secrets of the best fly fishing out west. Yellowstone Teton territory is not just a location, it's a gateway to adventures that will etch themselves into your memory. With crystal clear rivers like the Henry's Fork and the South Fork of the Snake and enough lakes to keep you going all year long, make your way to Yellowstone Teton territory and embark on a journey to one of North America's finest fly fishing destinations. Whether you're planning your trip now or just dreaming it up, the YTT is where those dreams turn into reality. Remember, Yellowstone Teton territory. That's Teton, Teton. It's time to experience Eastern Idaho for yourself and support this podcast at the same time. Is there a system of on the drawing? How does that work? The drawing system? Could anybody, if somebody was down in Maine or something like that, could they just enter and get a spot and figure out when they're fishing?
Yeah, so it's like essentially a 3-tiered system. There's what we call public water, or what I like to say public unlimited, which basically you don't need a reservation to go fish that water. You can just wake up in the morning, buy your tag, so you need to check in at the ZEC office. Now, thankfully we can do all of that online, which helps tremendously. When I first started here, you're driving like 45 minutes the wrong way to go to the ZEC office.
All right.
45 minutes back to get your tag for the day or whatever, But yeah, so you can get your tag, you sign up, you get your fishing license from the provincial government. You go on the ZEC website, you buy your public sector tag, and you can go and fish for the day. And then the rest of the rivers are usually split into beats, which have limited access. So you're still, the general public can still access it, but usually there's a limited amount of rods. It might be some sectors only 2 rods fishing, some sectors maybe 8 or 10. It really depends on how the ZECs wanted to split it. It's going to depend on how many pools you get out of it. That's kind of where it gets a little bit harder to navigate as an outsider. To access those, there is a preseason draw. So on November 1st of every year, for most of the rivers, you can buy like 7 tickets per person, and they do this massive draw with, really going to depend on the rivers, but a couple thousand participants.
So it's a draw. Is it a draw where you put in for it and then it's like a random draw, or is it like first come, first serve?
It's a random draw. Yep. They draw it randomly. And what that gives you is they put you on a call list. And then if you're at the tippy top of the call list, you're the first one to get the phone call, and you basically have the entire calendar to pick out of. And again, it's going to depend on the ZECs. Like some of them will be like, okay, if you're picking in June or July, you can only pick 2 days of fishing. If you're picking in August or September, you can get 3 or 4 days of fishing, right? They're kind of trying to manage access as equally as they can. But that's also something we navigate with our clients and we navigate ourselves, just kind of trying to pick that out. And then they go down the list. And so the lower you are in the list, the less, choice you have on what you want to pick. And, some people will just be like, oh, whatever, no need for the draw this year. They'll give up their spot. The next guy might take something, might not. Just really depends. And then the last tier is those sectors that you can draw in preseason usually they're almost always like a 50-50 split. So if there's 8 rods, there's going to be 4 rods drawn out in November, and then the other 4 are put into a short-term draw. So they usually happen 48 hours in advance.
Gotcha. So you can call in. So if it was, June 20th and you called June 18th, 48 hours before, you can put in, and again, is it a draw like the first come, or you put in for
random draw. So you buy a ticket, it's like $2-3. You can just buy one entry in the 48 hours. You just put your name in, and then they draw that afternoon or whatever, and then it's the same principle. They'll do a call list, and then they go down the list. But that's like something that we handle as like lodge managers. for our clients and our guide team, because again, being an independent guide, I've known the struggle of like not knowing if you're on the call list or you got to pre-arrange with the Zec and this and that because you're guiding people.
Right, as a guide. Yeah, that seems interesting because you got people coming in, they're planning on, like right now, let's just say we were planning on, okay, we're going to be there on our trip in, July 7th, but we don't know what we have. I mean, you have the public water, right? So you could have that, but the limited rod entry, you might not have a spot, right? And but you could get a spot within 48 hours. How do you guys balance that?
We really just we have a conversation on the first night, essentially with everybody's goals and like what they want to do. And if somebody's up here for the striper program and doesn't really care about the draw, we'll still put his name in, but we won't necessarily take it on his behalf. But we just try to have a conversation with them, and like, if you want, like, do you guys want to fish these beats if you come up? And we'll make a decision as managers to take the water that we think is worth it or not. And again, it's just going to depend on what the client wants to do.
Yeah.
Because our guides are comfortable fishing pretty much, and all the sectors are out here.
Yeah, they can fish it all. The good thing about it is that it's not necessarily it's a draw, right? So it's not a big pay to play. Or there are some private sections, but for the most part, it sounds like this is mostly a public draw system.
That's it. There's always a rod fee, and the draw sectors tend to be a little bit more expensive, but it's not like in the thousands of dollars. It might be
right.
You might go from a day rate that's like 80 something bucks to like 100.
Yeah, and that's why the Zec system. I see why and again, there's other areas around in the U.S. that they do draws for, like, go back to like the rafting stuff. These really busy rivers, the Colorado or the Grand Canyon. Lots of rivers where they put draws in, the same sort of thing. You put in just like that, and it's it's random, and it tends to. I feel like it works because it limits the pressure, right? And it provides for a better experience, which it sounds like that's what you get here.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it kind of evens out the pressure, spreads it out a little bit. It reduces the amount of anglers on the water all at once.
Right. What would happen if you, let's say, there wasn't a Zec system, it was pretty much just all, public, go whenever. What would that be like, do you think?
Well, for starters, I don't think there'd be very many Atlantic salmon left at all.
Oh, right. So that would be it. People would be hammering them.
Well, we're the Quebec, the typical Quebec clientele definitely likes to eat fish, and there's definitely like people that aren't afraid to poach around here. And I think the one thing that kept these fish safe for that amount of time is just having wardens and having guides and having people work on these rivers.
Sure.
So I don't know. I don't think there'd be that.
Yeah. So the Zec system is as much about the draw, limiting the experience, but also the people on the rivers and protecting it and keeping poachers out. Sounds like that's as much of a big deal for the Zec system.
Yeah, 100%. And, it's going to depend from Zec to Zec, depending on what the board wants to do. But in the last few years, you've seen such a big uptick in conservation projects led by Zecs, or in collaboration with the provincial government and the Quebec Salmon Federation, just kind of these three units working together, because some of them do have like good amount of money like sitting in accounts, depending on how they're spending it and they're managing it. So they kind of run as little businesses that have again, they're nonprofits, but they're trying to break even every year.
They're businesses. They have to have a profit.
Yeah, and some of them have, like the Petit Cascapedia, you can rent cottages. They bought they inherit an old fishing camp years ago, and so you can kind of get your fishing rights through them, and you can get a room at the camp, and if it's available, and they have campgrounds. The Bonaventure runs this really nice campground called Canagas. It's like in the headwaters. You're out in the middle of the woods, and they have this nice spot where you can pitch for the week, and you've got the showers and the toilets and power and internet. So it's kind of nice to get those services. It's a very Atlantic salmon fishing is still a gentleman's sport, It
is. There's still lots of tweed hats and all that stuff out there. People, wearing the old traditional style clothing. Do you see some of that?
Not a lot, but I do own a tweed hat that I'll.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
I'll take it out every now and again just for fun. If I'm fishing with.
Oh yeah.
We're trying to be pretentious.
No, I love it. I think that's I think that I love the traditional stuff. I don't really wear it, but I would. I feel like it is a good style. And it actually, I'm sure most of it's wool, so it probably has some some positive factors there. But okay, so this is good. So that's the ZEC system. That really works well. It sounds like your operation is pretty diverse. It's like even if one river's not in, you can go somewhere else. So if somebody was really thinking like I'm Atlantic salmon is, my thing, you guys could cover that. But it sounds like also if they were interested in maybe mixing it up, Atlantic salmon and stripers, that would be a worthwhile. Do you find typically more people are doing that than just the one species?
Yeah. I think that's really what we do well. We do the Atlantic salmon super well. Again, it's tradition, and guides that we are working with were pretty much all independents in the last few years, and they're close friends of ours, and they were all salmon people, essentially. So they know that program well. They can take you out on it. I guess at this point, I'm really the one that kind of pioneered the flats fishery for the stripers here. So it is a little bit closer to my heart. I think it's just an amazing flats fishery right now. It's
Yeah.
good enough to stand on its own,
Right. And this is right there. Is this near
Oh, this
like where the
this
right
is
in close?
5 miles away from the lodge. We've got a boat ramp, and we can put the skiffs in there. So what we do is we trailer all of our boats. We keep them at the lodge on trailers, and in the morning, depending on wind condition, and just again, we try to rotate a little bit our flats and spread the boat traffic out as much as we can. But yeah, we'll just hop in the car, launch the boat, maybe drive like 20, 30 minutes, get to a spot, launch it. And some of the spots, man, you're running a minute and a half. Some of the spots I've pulled from the trailer and pulled all day, never started the engine.
Oh, right. Nice.
So it's cool. It's right there, and it's a lot of fun, and the water is like crystal clear. It's all sight fishing, and our fish get skinny, 1.5 inches sometimes. And
Huh.
we can chase them around like bonefish. We'll get out of the boat. We'll do some walk and wade. Like that's my absolute favorite. Good, like short inbound. That's not too aggressive. We've got some beautiful sand flats, man. I'll just pretend like I'm in the Bahamas for a half a day.
God, sounds great.
Yeah, it's so cool. We always recommend it. We have clients that have coming, they've fished with us for years on kind of when we're independent or kind of mix and match bags, and they're hardcore salmon dudes. But a lot of times we get them, we'll convince them maybe at the end of a week or something, they want a easier day, they'll go flats fishing, and then they get it, it's so they might return to it a little bit more on the next few trips. But regardless of what people want to do, we've got enough gear for the 8 rods. We've got like 4 flats boat, we've got a center console, we've got all sorts of canoes and boats to do the salmon angling. We even have like a little John boat for pond fishing for brookies, if somebody wanted to do that. Like we just tried to cover all of the bases for this area. And we don't force people into a program. It's a pick and choose adventure. So, like when they come in on the first day, Sarah and I, we usually stick around for the entire evening, just having a chat with everybody, try to, get a rough forecast of the weather, get a rough forecast of what everybody's in for, like we do it pre-trip, but just, make sure that the plan still holds. If they're kind of, I want to fish, salmon all week. All right, cool. We'll build a trip around that. If somebody's like, I want to be, again, just striper fishing focused, cool. And then you get clients that are like, well, you guys know this area the best, what the weather's going to be like. So why don't we build a trip and go along the week and kind of play around with that, which is also something we do. And then just day of or night before, we just confirm the plan for the next day, depending on what folks want to do. And then and the next day we do it. So it's cool. Like there's and it's fisheries that bounce off one another well. Bright, sunny, low wind, warm, late July, August days usually make for some really good flats fishing. It's nice to be on the water during that time, and it's just beautiful. And then, if you get into September and you get a tail end of a hurricane and it's raining, sideways for 3 days, salmon love that stuff. The flats fishing, maybe not so much, especially not for the guide on the platform.
Yeah. So July might be a better time if you want to do the flats and the Atlantic salmon.
Oh, it's good. The flats fishing is super consistent throughout. Like, as soon as they show up, the first few days of June, maybe if we get like a really cold, long winter, like a long drawn out winter, they might show up around June 4th or 5th. So maybe the first few days of the season, they're not around. But then we get this highly consistent fishery all the way into October, because we can fish for those, a month longer. But it's just, yeah, it's cool. It's a nice area where there's no boat traffic. in the Gaspé. There's on the 50 miles of coast we fish, there's like two charters that are doing mostly like family trips with spinning rods and deep water stuff, trolling in 30, 40 feet of water. So we kind of have this huge coastline that we get to explore and play with, and we're not racing another lodge or another guide to get to a spot, which is cool. And you can kind of see it in the fish, because I know stripers like in the Northeast, our partner Kyle is a terrific flats guide for stripers down there. I know how hard those fish can be to catch. They're well educated, they're older, they're finicky, they can be spooky. But up here, they're just kind of a little bit more virgin. They're a little bit more eager to eat. A lot of them haven't seen us before, so it just makes for a fun time. And I like the flexibility of just like running around and trying different spots on our tides. And we'll do some traditional stuff. We'll do like a couple of rock points and deeper structures. So if we're jumping from one flat to the next, we might, if somebody's up for it, I might just pull up to a rock structure for like 10, 15 minutes and throw some big flies on sink lines, or, maybe throw like a hookless plug and just see if we can pop like a big fish off those rocks, and then just, all right, let's get back in the boat, or let's get back in the seat and just keep going, hit another flat and just rotate through the area. It's cool.
Yeah. Wow. Sounds like a great opportunity. Well, let's start to take it out here in a second here. We're going to kick this off with our fly fishing history segment today. And this is presented by Jackson Hole Fly Company. And the history, we're going to have a little history segment here, but I just want to shout out to first, and I want to ask you a question too. This goes back to the vest, and I'm not sure if you knew this, but the history lesson for today is the first fly fishing vest, right? Who created it? Do you know the answer to that?
I would say it's probably Filson.
Ooh, that's a good
Oregon.
guess.
It would have to be one of those two, I would say, but I don't know.
Yeah, so that is actually a great guess, but I think who it is Lee Wolf, right? Who is known as creating the typical vest, which is, I used to love the vest, right? It was the pockets, you put it on kind of like a jacket, not a jacket, but kind of like a vest. It's a vest, obviously, right? The fly vest, the old school, they kind of went away, right? Do you still see guys out there with the fly fishing vests?
There's a certain age group that still has the vest, but I grew up into when I started fly fishing, the vest was in, and then I was definitely in that first generation of like, if you're not using a hip pack, you look like an idiot.
It's right. That's what it is. So it's almost like the clothing. It shows your age. I mean, I find what I love about, and I'm guessing Atlantic salmon is the same way. I love just minimal, right? Because is it the same thing? Could you just go out there with a little chest pack or a little tiny and just or a little sling and just be good with that? You don't need much.
My wader pouch will be enough on certain days. I'll bring like a spool of tippet, pliers, a dozen salmon flies, and like 2 sink tips, and that's it. Like, I don't need more.
Exactly. So that's what's cool about it, is it's just like summer steelhead, especially. That's all it is, and you're out there, and the weather's good, right? July, you guys have some good weather too. So we want to give a shout out to Jackson Hole. I've been using their sling vest, which actually I've been loving. It's the perfect size. It's kind of, it's not too huge, it's not too small, but it's just like that, right? Put a couple fly boxes in there and some leader, and you're good to go. So first, that's our fly fishing history. The cool thing is Lee Wolf. We're going to be hopefully heading up that. I know he traveled around that part of the world back in the day, right? Flying his plane and stuff like that. So you guys don't have to do that though, right? In your area, there's no float planes aren't required out there.
No, that's it. We do all driving. It's a little bit easier to get around down here.
Yeah, a little bit easier. So to keep the history stuff going, you mentioned, I think earlier, about some of the legends out. Do you have a few people that, that are in that area that are kind of known, legendary kind of status for Atlantic salmon?
Well, I'd like to push like some of the really like local dudes.
Uh-huh.
I think there's a couple of guys that don't get like necessarily like huge exposure. There's obviously like David Bishop. He's
right.
Probably the best modern fly fishing guide in this area.
Yeah, right, David. We've had him on the podcast here I think last year.
Man, like David will school you on Atlantic salmon fishing.
Yeah. And is he a single hand or 2-hand guy?
2-hand guy.
He's 2-hand.
2-hand guy, yeah, for sure. He's also like, he's definitely a big water early season dude. He's amazing to fish with, but there's a bunch of people around here that are a little bit more low key. Glenn Harrison, local guy, legendary. He's been at it for super long. No website, no phone number. Got his cell phone like a couple years ago. Won't give out his number to anybody.
That's so cool.
Just such a fun cat to hang out with, and has fished all these rivers like crazy. There's Marc Leblanc, amazing fly tire, amazing guide, has been at it forever also. Inventor of the Picasso and a bunch of patterns that we use around here. And I mean, there's just a lot of these guys that kind of came into the system when the salmon rivers left the club scene, like when people could get access, and those first few guides that started like in the 80s and had these long careers and are kind of starting to retire now. There's a lot of names and faces that come up in my mind, but they've lived a quiet existence of unbelievable fishing.
That's so cool. And where did you grow up originally?
I grew up in the Eastern Townships, so essentially just north of Vermont, in Canada, of course, but more of the Great Lakes and Lake Champlain area.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. Yeah, so like a Montreal type area.
Yeah, southeast of Montreal.
Southeast, yeah.
Yeah, so I grew up, like, my fly fishing culture when I was young and learning this thing was really far from the Gaspé, because it's about, I'm about 8.5 hours away from my parents' place. But the Adirondacks are right there, an hour and a half to get to Lake Placid. So we'd just camp and live in our cars and fish like the Northeast US like crazy, and the Great Lakes in the winter for that, and smallmouth fishing in Quebec or around the island Montreal, and carp fishing and muskie and all sorts of species.
Yeah, so you've been doing all this a while.
Yeah, it's been a very full life of fishing at this point, and we still love it. We still get out every time.
Yeah, the lodge seems like the next big step. How does that feel where you're at now as you guys are getting close to launching this? Is this pretty exciting? What's your feelings now as you're on the tip of it?
It's definitely like all the emotions at once.
Yeah. Because are you probably thinking like, hey, now we've got this thing, we got to make it work, right? We've got to book lodges, right? Book places and all that stuff. So there's some, a little bit of anxiety too, right?
Yeah. But it's also been like amazing. And, the guide team that we're working with has helped us like put it together and building it. And so we're like, everybody's hands-on and connected to that place. And the community around us, like the town in Cascapedia is, I think, connected to the place. We've had so many cool people drop in and check it out. And because it was an abandoned house, essentially, that we're kind of back. Yeah. So, we've had people that come in and like, oh, I lived here 15 years ago. And when I moved back, like this was the house I rented for like, a couple of months to get situated in the area. And we had people drop us like a ton of like interesting gifts and memorabilia, like a salmon cutout from the 1920s, kind of like old trophy mounts. We had some of our guide team just completed their professional captain's course last week. And the guy that was giving us the course dabbled in commercial tuna fishing for years. So he brought us like old school, like level wind reels and all sorts of stuff he had like tucked away. And he's like, I'm not going to give these to you. If ever I leave this place, I'm going to come and get them. But it's like, they're just sitting in my attic. So like have them and have people, mess around with it. And that's been just amazing. So having that, thank God we have that community that's standing behind us and helping us out. And, these other managers of private camps that we can kind of like exchanged ideas with and stuff. But it's been thrilling, it's been exciting, and it's something we took our time, Sarah and I, working on for a really long time, just fine-tuning and getting better at the whole hosting thing. It's going to feel different for me because I was, essentially always been a full-time guide for the past 10 years, 11 years, I think. And this is going to be the first season where I'm not expecting to spend my entire summer on the water. I'm going to be much more in a management role. I'm going to sit back and support my team, and maybe I'll be the one doing the boat cleaning in the evening and doing the maintenance and entertaining a little bit more.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah. So that's going to be, just a transition period I'm looking forward to also, because it's something we enjoy doing. Sarah and I, the Gaspésian people are very gregarious, and we always particularly loved hosting and having dinner parties at the house. And like our home has been a very busy place in the past 5 years.
And that's where you guys live there in that town as well?
Yeah, we were like 5 minutes away.
Oh yeah, so you're right. And you've been there for a little while.
Yeah, I've been here for since 2018.
Yeah, good while. Gotcha. And then you said your partner, she grew up there?
Yep. Yeah, she's Cascapedia through and through.
There you go. That's pretty sweet. And it's obviously different. You're further out, like you said, it's just smaller, it's 8 hours away. So you're out of the influence of all the, right, Quebec, pretty far out of that.
Yeah. We're the Gaspé's quiet. The entire peninsula I think is like 47,000 people or something. The way I like to see it is we're a 2 street light county.
Yeah, 2 street light. That's pretty good. Nice. Well, I was going to ask just on a couple of tips before we get out of here. And one of them was I was just thinking, teeing this up, somebody comes there, they're getting ready for this trip to fish for Atlantic salmon. Let's just keep it on that. What are some, basically common mistakes that you see a lot that people make when they come there? Do you see some common things over and over again for new people to the area?
I think for this particular location, it's going to sound silly, but coming in over prepared. You'll sometimes get people that will just buy these like fly boxes full of stuff and bring all this gear, and we're not in a remote location. We have this great fly shop.
Oh, you do? You have a fly shop?
Yeah. We got the fly shop like right across the street.
Oh, you do? What's the name of the fly shop?
Sextons and Sextons.
Sextons and Sextons.
Legendary Atlantic salmon shop.
Oh, it is. Oh, cool. Sextons and Sextons. Yeah.
Yeah, one of those definitely like chaotic fly shops where there's like stuff to the walls like everywhere. There's just like anything and everything you could need for Atlantic salmon fishing is there. Yeah, it's kind of a funny trip because I'm usually on the opposite end of the spectrum when I'm going into these remote places of just like triple packing everything. But like, yeah, like not necessarily kind of come in with an open mind. We'll go through the gear that you need to bring and bring that and maybe like a spare rod or something. But don't stress yourself out a couple weeks out thinking you're not going to have the right gear. We tie flies throughout the season. We've got a lot of homebrew stuff that we keep secret,
Yeah.
And then we got the fly shop next door and we're there to support the team. So that's like just like a little mistake I can see. And I think it's local knowledge and not necessarily like just strictly local knowledge, but like what's going on that week or like that period you visit. Anywhere I go, if I'm in an area with fly shops, I'll carry about half the amount of flies I normally would. I'll take the old standards and I'll just go and spend some time and pick some brains and just try to see what's going on that week, because we all know how it is. Like we'll carry 250 flies on the water and we'll fish 3 patterns.
Yeah. That's actually, you have the green one, like we said, the chartreuse, the red, and maybe a bomber.
Yeah, and God forbid you hit a fish on one particular pattern, because then it's not only you, but it's you, your buddy, and everybody else in your circle trip. That's like, ooh, like that's the one, right? We build confidence and excitement into these flies, and you feel it becomes very hard to go away from it if it produces a couple of fish in a row.
Oh yeah, you got to stick with it. So you're on the water with basically the basics, the supplies. And then as you're sitting there, what would be a couple of other tips you would give somebody that's their first time on the water, they're getting ready to make their first cast? What would you tell
them? Start short.
Yeah, like short within like 10 feet, just to get your tip out and just right in front of you.
Yeah, because they might be right there, especially if you don't know the water. They can be very, very close. Take your time going through the pool.
Yeah. What is the typical average? Is it cast? Swing. What's that look like? The cadence.
Cast, swing, step down, and that is very holy in Quebec.
Cast, swing, step down, and these are some clear water, so you might change that, but for the most part, a step or two sort of thing after between casts.
Yeah, and there's this whole angler etiquette. If ever you like bump into someone else, like on the river, some of the more famous pools, you might get a couple of guys that'll spend the day there, and it's like you have to start at the head of the pool. You can't step in below the dude, or you have to let the dude finish a swing. You can't be drag. If you're too slow, they'll tell you. And then if you get a hit, you're only allowed. You can't stay there for an hour. You might get, another 5 minutes to play with the fish, change your fly out, this and that. But it's regimented in that angling culture too.
Yeah. We were just talking to somebody the other day about in one of our home waters where you have some conventional fishing and fly fishing mixed. And sometimes you get these guys that are like, will post up right in the middle of the run where everybody's swinging through, and you'll see some anger. Did you have that, or conventional guys fishing for these fish too?
No, this is all fly fishing.
Is that because is it fly fishing only, or there just aren't
Fly fishing only and unweighted flies only.
So no lures. Yeah, you can't use any lures or anything.
You can't use you can't put something on your fly that would change its action in the water. You know, so no Dick Knight either.
What about the two? Is it single hook, or do you have the old school, the two hooked flies?
You
Hooks?
still allow the double, the double point hook.
The double hook, and is that double hook that is kind of for tracking to get it down for weight a little bit? Why is the double hook used?
So I don't like the double hook just because I find it can hurt the fish. I will use the double hook, like you say, on really small patterns. If I'm going like 10 and under, I might start bringing out some double hooks, and I think it just keels the fly a lot better.
Yeah.
Because those smaller flies will tend to like spin on their own, or just like...
Oh, right, because there's not enough weight on the fly.
Yeah, so they can just keel a little bit better. And I mean, if you're fishing something like a size 12, you do need maybe that little extra gripping power. Well, if it's in barbless, then I've cut like a lot of them, just if I'm hesitating, if he took it on the tongue or something and it's not bleeding, I'll leave it in place. And
yeah, right. Barbless is the way to go.
Yeah, but we don't do trebles, thank God.
Yeah, no trebles, right? Yeah, trebles is the next level. Okay.
But yeah, it's just it's cool. I mean, I'll rotate back to like just a tip. It's just like enjoy the day, especially if you're coming up on your own. It's a very social experience to fish for Atlantic salmon. Like we say, the Zex will put out like picnic tables and benches, and if there's a drizzle, man, somebody's going to start a fire. Get a fireplace going, and you'll get people that will. Well, we've done it too in the past, but we'll, bring down a bottle of wine to the river for fishing for fun and have like an elaborate lunch and just kind of hang out and enjoy being on the water a lot. It's not there's a couple of people that do it really hardcore, and it definitely pays out, but I think there's a beauty and kind of a reverence to just the social aspect of Atlantic salmon fishing is cool. Yeah,
sounds like it. No, it's cool. And I think the area, we've definitely heard about that, the Gaspé, Peninsula, where we were talking about today. And shout out to Nicole. I know she was probably one of the first people that I heard that had fished, and somebody I knew that was fishing up there. And she was just kind of raving about it, right? How, there's so many great areas, like you said, in that whole part of northeastern, Canada, United States, but it's definitely one of those spots. So this has been great, Andrew. I think we could leave it there for today, and we'll send everybody out to GaspéCoastal.com.
Yes, sir.
And that's GASPE coastal.com if they want to connect with you. And yeah, it sounds like you guys, if they were, this episode probably is going to go out in a couple months, so it might be getting close to your season. But if they, is that the best way to check in on availability for your place this year?
Yeah, 100%. I will say Sarah's got the organized mind, and she will read your email and respond. If you DM me or text me over phone, I might be a bit slower.
Sure. So email. So just go in there and email to connect with you guys.
Yeah, for sure. That's the best way to reach us. And we're always happy to chat and hop on a call and just get everybody situated and answer questions, man. The winter is a time to think and talk about fishing up here. So it's always a blast to do it.
That's cool. Well, this is great. Well, congrats on launching the lodge, and excited to keep in touch with you. And hopefully we'll be up there on the Gaspé, someday as well, and someday soon. And we'll check back with you then.
Thank you so much, Dave.
A call to action for you today. Your call to action is, if you're interested in stripers, especially for flats up north, salmon fishing, for Atlantic salmon, sea run, brook trout, you know where to go. Check in with Andrew, GaspéCoastal.com. Let him know you heard this podcast and check in and see what he has going. We have a YouTube channel going strong right now. If you haven't checked it out, Wet Fly Swing on YouTube. Bruce Richards did a casting seminar. You want to check that out. We're doing a lot of shorter content there as well, expanding on some of the podcast episodes we do. And then we're doing some long form stuff around webinars, and some of the best are going to be on. So Bruce Richards, check that out. That's on there right now. Mentioned at the start, the Missouri trip is going right now. We just kicked it off. If you're interested in heading out to the Missouri to fish with me and a group from this podcast, go to wetflyswing.com/Missouri, MISSOURI. All sorts of great stuff on the Missouri. Big trout, big fish per mile numbers, and an epic little lodge that we're going to be staying at, family-owned lodge. Can't wait for this. Want to remind you before we get out of here, next episode is a big one. Jack Dennis is back, the man himself. We've heard so much about Jack Dennis, whether from Scott at Grand Teton or Jeff Currier, all the influences, and Jack's going to bring a big one on Monday. Don't miss this. He's one of the biggest names in fly fishing, and he's got so many stories that they're bulging out of his ears. So we can't wait to share this one on Monday. All right, I'm getting out of here. Appreciate you. I appreciate you for stopping by today. Hope you have a great morning. Hope you have a great afternoon or a fantastic evening if it's evening and you're enjoying it right now. Maybe the moon's out. You're hearing the frogs off in the distance. If that's you, I hope you have a good night, and we will see you on that next episode. Talk to you then.